have favored them. But even Ferrari, we were lamenting them, we were criticizing them all the way through. In 2021, they've just flicked a switch. And this right here is just something brilliant that we're seeing from the team right now. And the best part is it's coming from two drivers instead of just one, which brings us into discussing more about teammates, because all of a sudden we have a few really interesting stats to speak about teammates and how they are faring against each other. And clearly, guys, Mattia Binotto right here is coming up and saying Ferrari just has the best driver lineup on the entire grid. And it just might be backed up by the fact that their two teammates are so close on the rankings right now in terms of points as well. And it's not the older driver in the team who's winning, it's the one who's joined in here.
Yep, because we have Sainz coming into the team, and you would often think that when drivers are presented with new machinery, they're going to be taking some time to get accustomed to the car, and there's going to be a couple of issues and everything. But Sainz has been his consistent best, what he's been doing since his McLaren days and even before as well. He's right up there with Leclerc, and there's just a 3 points difference between the both of them. So I would differ to Binotto's claim that he has the best team or the best drivers in the field, because I feel that there are much more talented ones or much more skilled drivers than, for example, like Perez and Verstappen. But it's just that Perez is not firing on all cylinders, and also with Ricciardo not firing on all cylinders, I think there's a bit more output that can be extracted from that Red Bull and that McLaren.
It's outstanding, right? As you can see on the graphic on the screen right now, or if you're listening to the podcast version, Vettel 12 points ahead of Lance Stroll, that is. Sainz 3 points ahead of Charles Leclerc. Both of these are two drivers that have come into the team and who have made an impact all of a sudden. But Kunal, what's actually interesting is that on the back half of the field, we might just have a very fun driver who is all of a sudden the one furthest behind to his teammate. It's not who we think it is somehow.
Yeah, that's the biggest surprise. I have two surprises, First, of course, is that the biggest qualifying gap is actually Yuki Tsunoda to Pierre Gasly. All along, we would have assumed that it's Nikita Mazepin for the obvious reasons. The global ambassador, at least in my head, for Manscaped lawnmower. If there's any driver who's probably had a higher chance of going off, it's Mazepin, of course. That's just my view. But the second one, of course, in this whole teammates comparison has been the gap in qualifying between Vettel and Stroll. I all along would have believed that Vettel would have been miles ahead, purely because of his qualifying prowess during his Ferrari years and Red Bull years. He's always the single lap specialist, right? But Stroll, on the other hand, has always been promoted as, he's the guy who gets you points on a Sunday. But suddenly when you see this gap between the Aston Martin drivers, and I'm like, okay, wow, that is really close.
It is just fascinating, this one. And Lance Stroll, we've often said that, he's just a pay driver. He's here because his dad is in. That might be the case, but you've got to admit, he's closed up the gap so much. And these teammate comparisons really boggle your mind, right? Because as Kunal, as you rightly mentioned, who would have thought that he was so close to Vettel in terms of qualifying and even in terms of the points gap? Had it not been for Hungary, well, who knows how things could have been. Had it not been for the disqualification, had it not been for the crash. But yeah, stuff just happens.
Yeah, I have one further point to this whole teammate comparison thing. So like Kunal mentioned, it's Yuki Tsunoda who has the biggest average qualifying gap to his teammate. Yep. And also if you look at the points difference, you see Sergio Perez is 80 plus points behind, Daniel Ricciardo is 60 plus points behind. But once again, this stat, the numbers are pretty misleading. So if you look at their teammates, it's Pierre Gasly, it's Lando Norris, it's Max Verstappen. And all these drivers have been with the team for a couple of years. They're accustomed to the cars. They know how the different functions and how the team work. So in that sense, it's a bit tipping in their side. Obviously, they will be extracting a bit more potential than their new teammates. So in that sense, Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher are on a level field, and they are two rookies. So in that sense, I would say Nikita Mazepin is the slowest driver on the grid at this point of time. because your teammate is the benchmark that
Yeah.
you've set if you want to compare the performance. So in that sense, I would say it's Nikita Mazepin and not basically what the stat says about Yuki Tsunoda.
The exact numbers: Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda, 5/10 of a second, not 5.5 tenths of a second, the average qualifying gap. Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, 4.5 tenths of a second, the average quali gap between them. Verstappen, 4.5 tenths ahead of Sergio Perez. George Russell, 370 tenths of a second behind of Latifi. Giovinazzi again 3 tenths behind, 3 tenths ahead of Raikkonen. Norris 3 tenths ahead of Ricciardo. Hamilton 1.5 odd tenths ahead of Bottas. Leclerc 1/10 ahead of Sainz on average. Ocon just 0.03 of a second ahead of Alonso per lap, and Stroll 1.5 hundredths. It is just stunning stuff, these gaps that we've pulled out right here. It's incredible. But before we move on to speaking about what we have to expect later on in the season, we just got to wonder, right? The point that you mentioned about Schumacher, the point that you mentioned about Mazepin, at least they're both tied on points in a way. So he's not losing out that bad to his teammates. So there's one aspect to it. But I think that's enough on sledging more about teammates and discussing more about that. We've discussed the star performers. We've discussed how good Stroll and how good Sainz have been, which leads us very well into speaking about the coming half of the season. Second half, there's tons and tons and tons of things to expect all the way through to the season. But why don't we go with you first, Kunal? What do you want to see the most happening in this second half of the season? What do you think is going to happen here?